And cultures is a degree in either it's world languages and cultures with an emphasis in Spanish or Japanese. All of the morning's presentations and to now have been those who have emphasized Spanish. Our next presentation is one who is going to emphasize Japanese. Now, this young man would obviously not have been able to do his presentation without the guidance of Professor Saiko Abbott, who is present here, and Tom Abbott, who is present also, they are 2/3 of our Japanese faculty. Thank you for the presence. And Derek is going to be talking to us on the Japanese Self-Defense Force, the Pacific War Machine. If you permit me, Derek. Para ustedes que no son muy familiares con nuestro programa, en el instituto tenemos un major, una carrera que es en lenguas y culturas mundiales. Sin embargo, dividimos esta en dos áreas, en el japonés y en el español. Todas las presentaciones de la mañana han sido en enfoque del español. Ahora se nos presenta el estudiante que este año se graduó en el japonés, se llama Derek Psaros. And before I allow Derek to speak, I realized that Kayoko is here also. Kayoko Sher, who's also one of the faculty members in Japanese, and she's here also, one of Derek's instructors. So with that, Derek.
All right. I think my tech support just left. Is this on? All right. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your lucky number 13 presenter. Lucky for you because it's the end, and lucky for me because this is almost over. I'll be presenting, there is a version of this which is in English, presented entirely in Japanese, but for your purposes and so that I don't throw up or something, I'm going to be doing this in English for you all. So, my name is Derek Psaros. I'm representing World Languages and Cultures. My emphasis is Japanese. And we're going to be talking about the Japanese Self-Defense Force, or as I like to call them, the Pacifist War Machine. Now let me consult my notes. The first part of it's going to be two sections to this presentation. The first one, I hope to give you some background, some history, some current events, so you're better armed for what my second part of this is, which was a survey that I conducted with Japanese and American students and civilians. So let us get to the format. Let's see, we have, survey. Okay, the significance of the study. The significance of this presentation, the study, really rests in current events. Right now, Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution, which was written after World War II, prevents them from engaging in any warlike conduct, either at home or abroad, except specifically to defend themselves. This might be changing soon, and I want to explore how a volunteer police force became one of the fourth most expensive militaries in the world, and how this might affect Japan, American, and world politics. The first part of this we're going to be talking about is the history. I'm going to give you an idea of the formation, how it came to be. We're going to discuss a little bit about the mission of the Japanese Self-Defense Force, the structure, what makes the Self-Defense Force unique as compared to other military units in the world, and some of the controversy that surrounded it over the last few years. And then I'm going to present to you my survey and my own thoughts in my conclusion. Okay, first some history. In 1945, after the dropping detonation of 2 nuclear weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the Japanese government surrenders to a foreign power for the first time in its history. After this, the Japanese military is disbanded, and the military structure has turned into a civilian economy. I'm going to give you some more history. Sorry, my notes go. Okay. In 1947, General MacArthur, who was the commander in charge of occupational forces in Japan, needed to bolster the American troops that are stationed there to help rebuild Japan culturally and physically. He recruited 75,000 volunteer policemen. This was called the National Police Reserve. In the 1950s, America refocused. I'm sorry, I have to go. I have a premature slide change here. In the 1950s, the United States refocused its attention on Korea. And after United States military forces began to leave Japan to go to Korea and start a conflict there, there was a necessity to fill the role that the United States was serving, which was as peacekeepers and police, etc. At this point, the National Police Reserve was renamed the National Safety Force. And in 1954, when the National Defense Law of Japan was passed, when the National Defense Law of Japan was passed, which gave them the ability to defend themselves against a foreign aggressor. At this point, the National Safety Force was renamed again the National Defense Agency, and those subordinate to this body are called the Jieitai, or Japanese Self-Defense Force. So if you understood any of those acronyms, now we'll move on to the structure. The chief commander, or supreme commander of the Japanese Self-Defense Force is the Prime Minister. Today this man is Junichiro Koizumi. He has the power to enlist the Self-Defense Force in military or humanitarian action, but needs approval by the Japanese Diet. For those of you not familiar with Japanese government, the Japanese Diet is sort of the equivalent to Great Britain's Parliament. He has emergency powers, much like the President of the United States does. But in order to enact these, he can do things under emergency circumstances, but must actually get approval from the Diet after the fact. The Japanese Self-Defense Force is broken into three major branches, much like our military is broken into three branches. These branches are the Air Self-Defense Force, the Ground Self-Defense Force, and the Maritime Self-Defense Force. These are the equivalents of our Air Force, Army, and Navy, respectively. First, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Ground Self-Defense Force, give you an idea of what they do. The primary mission is to distribute humanitarian aid and help in crisis situations. If there's people to be pulled out of a building or emergency food or medicine to be distributed, you can bet the Ground Self-Defense Force is going to be there as an extension of police or fire crews. Additionally, they have a military role, and that is to defend Japan should something bypass the Air Self-Defense Force or the Japanese Navy, the Maritime Self-Defense Force, and actually make it to the ground. Thus, they train extensively in minesweeping, in marksmanship. They have a fleet of sophisticated tanks that since the 80s have actually been built completely in Japan, utilizing technology shared with the United States and as well as other countries. Excuse me. Alright, that brings us to the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, or the Japanese Navy. Their mission is to patrol the waters around Japan. This includes shipping routes and fishing areas and the small islands that speckle the landscape of Japanese waters, and to intercept unidentified vessels, boats and such that may enter Japanese waters. A secondary or even tertiary use of the Self-Defense Force, at least as of late, is as support for America. During our operations in Afghanistan, the Japanese Self-Defense Force sent several boats after our fleets to use their technology in advanced missile detection. Though it's the policy that if any of their troops come under fire for any reason, despite the situation, they will pull them out immediately. That's important to note. This is taken from the Japanese Defense Agency's website. It just gives you sort of an idea that they have a plan set up if someone decides to swim over to their side of the world and start an invasion. They do have scores of submarines. They're anti-aircraft missiles, all this sort of stuff, and it is allotted for. Training can include, there's officer training, which is the equivalent to four-year college degree. There's actually 4-year requirement in the Japanese Defense Academy, followed by 1 year of officer training. So to become an officer in the Maritime Self-Defense Force, you're looking at a good 5 years of education. If you decide that that's probably more than you want, well, you can go into either flight school or you could or submarine duty. This brings us to the ASDF. The primary mission of the ASDF, or what they're most used for, is a fast way of getting humanitarian aid either across Japan or overseas. Usually they transport food and men and equipment and medicine to countries that need them because they're faster than boats. The other purpose is to patrol the air above Japan and to watch over the waters, any places that they may face threats. Again, like the last diagram, here's another diagram which shows the plan if they should be invaded, both with plans for sea combat and ground combat. This is actually really important because Japan is an isolated country. It's islands, so there's lots of coastal area. The Maritime Self-Defense Force can't be everywhere, and Air Self-Defense Force has a better view of it. That brings us to, excuse me. Oh, we didn't want to do that, did we? Okay, go away. Sorry. This brings us to things that make the Japanese Self-Defense Force unique. Their structure, not quite unique. We have a similar structure, and why is that happening? Okay, where can I put this that... Yeah, okay, this is going to sit over there, hopefully. So yeah, we're going to talk about what makes them unique here. A brief little fact, pay is different than is done in most military units. It's based on seniority or how long you've been involved in the military. Therefore, a non-commissioned officer, let's say a sergeant, can expect to, if he's been in the military for 5 or 10 years, actually has a higher pay than a colonel who just graduates from the academy. In that respect, there's a little bit more incentive for them to stay, and they keep non-commissioned officers easier that way. We also have, it's strictly volunteer. You can, unlike our military, you sign a commitment, but you can quit 6 months into it if you want. You sign up for 2 or 3 years, but Article 18 of the Constitution prohibits involuntary servitude. So a loose interpretation of that is military service. In court, it may not stand up, but nobody really wants to test constitutional law in that way. Also, the humanitarian mission of the Self-Defense Force is a little bit unique. They have a fantastic humanitarian record, and their record for non-aggression. And the role of women in their military is a little bit different than many others. We're going to talk a little bit about the humanitarian aspects. Like I stated earlier, the primary mission of the SDF is to protect Japan, both from enemies and natural disasters. They protect them. You can expect the SDF to show up at sites of hurricanes. I'm sorry, not hurricanes. Those are different ocean. Typhoons, earthquakes, even volcanic eruptions, which do happen. Evacuations, that sort of thing. Let's see. Additionally, internationally, this is pretty important. They've done peacekeeping efforts in other countries, including Cambodia in the early 90s, and in Honduras on November 13th, 1998, after Hurricane Mitch destroyed roads and airports. The Japanese Self-Defense Force was there to help repair them. Originally, it was supposed to be a combined effort between the United States and Japan, but a conflict arose and the United States pulled out, and they ended up using Russian assistance. That also brings up a current event with Iraq. Koizumi has sent $25 million in rice and medicine to Iraq and has been approved to send $100 million more to help out the post-war peacekeeping there. The Japanese government wants to be involved militarily with the peacekeeping, but they've stated they'll only do it with an official invitation and with official approval by the United Nations. That brings us to the role of women in the military. Many people, when they think about women in the military, usually consider women to have roles equal to secretarial or medical. In the Japanese Self-Defense Force, all of the military occupational specialties, except ones that might expose you directly to combat, are open to women. Women receive the same amount of pay for having the same rank. Also, contrary to the United States custom, are expected to have the same physical requirements and the same training for certain positions. This, I have to read my slides. This lady her name is Kazue Kashiji. She's actually the first female pilot in the Japanese Air Self-Defense Force, and as of last week has become the first female flight instructor at the Japanese Defense Academy, the Air Force Academy. As a child, her father worked on Maritime Self-Defense Force planes, and that's when she decided that she wanted to embrace that protective spirit that she saw in Self-Defense Force members. And so she joined. She now has the rank of captain and has been flying in the ASDF since 1997. Okay, I'm going to stray away from cultural differences for a second and put how much this is costing them into perspective. This here is Japan's spending. This is North Korea, and this is China. By law, Japan is limited to a 1% of their gross domestic product on the military, on defense. Of course, North Korea and China have no such limitations. Korea spends almost a third of the gross domestic product on the military, which comes out to about $5.1 billion. Though this is 1%, it's still 8 times more than Korea's spending, which is part of the reason why their military is so advanced. Japan actually spends more money per soldier than any country in the world, and is ranked 4th as far as advanced militaries worldwide, even though it has no military application. China looks pretty impressive at $60 billion, but most of this money is spent replacing old Soviet technology that they acquired at the end of the Cold War, whereas Japan's is spent on research and development and more advanced technologies like weapon detection systems and that sort of thing. Okay, a couple issues of controversy before we get to the survey, because they're not without their problems. This is an F-16, which in 1989, the United States and Japan went into an agreement to work on an F-16 to create a new experimental aircraft that both Japan and the United States would use in our air forces. The project was called the FSX. After the agreement was signed, the United States government, under pressure from the companies that were involved, came to Japan and said, look, we're not going to be making enough money off of this. We want to actually use the F-15, which is composed of fewer Japanese parts. Not many people know this, but a lot of the engines used in our warplanes, as well as warplanes around the world, are made by Mitsubishi. The F-15 uses fewer of those parts. The F-16 uses more, which is why Japan wanted to modify this one. So they returned to the table and talked about it and decided, the U.S. said, our companies want 40% of the work because they don't want you getting patents and then selling them to other people. Japan, rightfully so, was pretty insulted, especially since the agreement was already made. Both parties left the table feeling a little bit sour, and the project was scrapped. The significance of this is it pushed Japan to a more independent military economy with less dependence on the United States for technologies. This is North Korea's flag. North Korea has not been a very good neighbor to Japan in the last few years. They'd fire several missiles into the Sea of Japan. They even fired a missile over Japan into the Pacific with no provocation and no explanation. Additionally, the Maritime Self-Defense Force has caught several spy boats in Japanese waters. The first shots, actually, that Japan has made in anger in 50 years since World War II were made by the Maritime Self-Defense Force against Korean vessels. Here again is Article 9. There's lots of pressure from outside of Japan to change this, because Article 9 prohibits Japan from engaging in any warlike activity outside of defense. Okay, that brings us to my study. Significance, the reason I did the study is I wanted to gain insight into what's going on in the minds of Japanese and American civilians and military personnel. Now that you have a little brief history on the Self-Defense Force and its evolution, and the fact that Article 9 may be under revision, it was important for me to see where, especially when we're talking about two democracies, the opinions of the people make quite a bit of difference, and it was important for me to explore that. I'm going to tell you the question I attempted to answer with this presentation and with respect to the interviews, the method I used to attain this information, my findings, and then finally I'll close with my conclusion. The question I wanted to answer was, where did the Japanese Self-Defense Force come from? How did a bunch of volunteer policemen end up being the fourth most expensive and advanced military in the world, especially considering it's illegal to be violent. And there's some being non-violent, and there's ones looking violent. My methodology was I distributed surveys and did interviews with Japanese nationals, both here and overseas, as well as American students and Japanese and American servicemen. Japanese-American servicemen. All right. So here goes our questions. This is a sample of 4 of the questions I thought were some of the more pertinent ones. There was actually a list of 10. The first was, what do you think the role of the Self-Defense Force is? Most Japanese replied, well, to defend us. Well, that makes sense. The only thing that surprised me about the answer was how few actually addressed the humanitarian record of the Self-Defense Force. So I was a little bit surprised there, since it's been my understanding that the Japanese government and people are very proud of the fact that they have a non-violent military. Americans didn't know what the JSDF was, and when explained to them, said, defense? Because it's in the name. So I didn't gain too much insight from American college students outside of those who actually have studied Japan a little bit. American servicemen, however, especially those stationed on the West Coast and overseas, have a pretty intimate knowledge of the role of the Self-Defense Force. The next question addressed was, given the humanitarian record but the warlike capability of Japan, where do you think the Self-Defense Force is best suited, either in Japan or abroad? All the Japanese I spoke to said that they'd prefer to see the Self-Defense Force stay in Japan, maybe even scale down from international politics, except for one condition. All of them also agreed that should the United States have further conflict, or should something violent escalate between the United States and Korea, the Self-Defense Force should back the United States up in that situation. Americans felt similarly in that they believed that Japan should take a larger role in world situations, and agreed that that should we actually go to war or have a violent interaction with Korea, especially the servicemen, figured that they would really like to see Japan capable of helping us out in a militaristic way. Next question. Oh, excuse me. My things got out of order. Oh no. Okay. The relationship between the United States military forces and the Japanese military forces. This is pertinent because since World War II, there's been a huge American military presence. And because of that, the Japanese military trains extensively with the United States. And these are the answers. Japanese figure the relationship to be pretty 50-50. It's an exchange. It's an opportunity to learn from each other. It's learn tactics, train with each other's equipment, that sort of thing. Americans, on the other hand, perceived the Japanese military to be more like, well, how you'd perceive the United States going to teach another country how to defend itself, or it was more of a teacher-student or big brother sort of relationship. Except servicemen, those that were involved in the military, all the ones I spoke to were actually Marine Corps or Navy and had been stationed in Japan at one time or another, had a great deal of respect for the Japanese Self-Defense Force, and actually said that some of their training, especially when it comes to extreme conditions, surpasses even those of our force recon. This brings us to Article 9, and to really push in what this is about, I'm going to read you Article 9. It's pretty short and only in 2 parts. The first part says that while aspiring sincerely to an international peace based on justice and order, the Japanese people forever renounce war as a sovereign right of the nation, and the threat or use of force as means of settling international disputes. Makes sense. Second part, in order to accomplish the aim of the preceding paragraph, land, sea, and air forces, as well as war potential, will never be maintained. The right of aggression of the state will not be recognized. Okay, then why do they have tanks and planes and big boats with big guns? Well, many people say that the even existence of the Japanese Self-Defense Force is in direct violation of Article 9 of the Constitution. Further, there's been so much pressure outside of Japan to change it that it's now coming time where that might actually happen. The Poles, Japanese, actually I'll go ahead and tell you the Americans first. The Americans actually, when that was read to them, or when they read it themselves, thought it was completely preposterous. That how could you have a country that wasn't allowed to fight anyone if they couldn't, wasn't allowed to engage in any sort of practice of war, and isn't even allowed to stock weapons of any sort. American servicemen, so all of them, given the idea that they couldn't even understand the idea of such a amendment or such an article to a constitution, all supported the idea of getting rid of it or changing it to allow more military power. The Japanese, on the other hand, and I should note that the sampling that I used was mostly young people, so we're talking college age or military enlistment age. Those people that would not remember a post-war Japan or the terror that comes with having an armed conflict with another country. Despite that, there was still only 50% that were for changing the constitution to give Japan more military power, which I figured was quite telling. So, what does this all mean? Well, in conclusion, I should state that this week, on Tuesday, as a matter of fact, legislation passed the House of Representatives and is now being reviewed that would give Japan further wartime power, would enable them to retroactively engage in a potential enemy, the terminology for this sort of legislation was actually thrown out last year when it was brought in the first time because of roundabout wording like that. It was too ambiguous. It could be interpreted in too many ways and was discarded. But today, the ruling military party, as well as their opposition, hope to get this passed by June 10th. If that occurs, we may be on the cusp of a new era in history for Japan as a military power. They're the richest country in East Asia, with the most expensive military, most advanced military. One could postulate that with a more independent military and without the need of the United States presence, they may invite the United States to leave altogether. Should that happen, perhaps even further trade could expand their relations with China and Korea in a better way. Japan has to gain 40% of the world defense and military market should the Constitution be changed in such a way that that becomes legal. The only other country that comes close to that is the United States, which means billions upon billions of dollars of revenue. Conversely, or shall I say ironically, still the number one opposition to this, despite the fact that we're talking about one of the most advanced militaries in the world, despite the fact that we're talking about a country that has seen its first potential real threat in 50 years, has one of the strongest nations in the world to back it up, and a large young population which doesn't remember war. Still, the biggest opposition to ratifying or changing Article 9 comes from the Japanese people. The Japanese people are intensely proud of the fact that their military is known for humanitarian aid, for helping people. It started off as a police force of volunteers. They go around the world handing out medicine and filling sandbags. And I invite you all to keep an eye on this issue, as it may change and has a potential to completely change Japan's politics, our politics, and world politics. Before I'm done, I'll give you a nice little picture of some pacifists. And I'd like to give some special thanks to these fine folks here. I'd like to thank the language facilitators who work in this department, without whom this would not have been possible. Also, I'd like to thank my instructors, Tom Abbott, Yoshiko Saito Abbott, Kayoko Shur, for excellent instruction. I'd like to thank the 2003 Capstone class. I had a great time being part of, though sometimes I felt a little bit like a Japanese island in there. I like the opportunity to see all your guys' presentations start and grow from the ground up. I've been very entertained, and I've learned a lot. And I'd like to thank militarypowers.com, who actually gave me permission to use all of their mighty fine graphics for my presentation, if I thank them publicly. Thank you.
Wow, that completes our Capstone 2003. I would like to ask all my friends and colleagues to applaud our students. I think they've done just a wonderful job. Thank you all. As you can see, we've had a wonderful journey. A lot of nations, a lot of cultures, and a lot of epochs. That wouldn't have been possible without the assistance of all of our instructors, and of course without our students beside us. And I hope that those students who are here from next year's crop listen carefully and can start preparing, because the students of today have really given us a high obstacle jump. Thank you all.
No nos queríamos ir sin antes mencionar, estábamos esperándolo hasta el último para decirlo en grupo. Nuestro grupo de la sección de español queremos darle unas grandes gracias a los profesores de esta sección, ya que nos han apoyado muchísimo, nos han ayudado, nos han aguantado, nos han guiado. Muchas gracias al doctor Gómez,
doctor Celina.
Muchísimas gracias a todos, a todo el equipo,
a todos que nos ayudan. Marta, claro, no tiene que vernos de ella.
a las 3, 1, 2, 3. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias.
And I hope to see you all tomorrow in commencement. No reprueben. Yo no me gradué. Yo te dije que no dijeras nada. Yo me voy a graduar, vas a ver, hasta doctorado. No puedo no me lo bailes. Pero ya me borraron, si es la mía. Yeah. You guys got it? 3, 2, 1.
Stay there.
¿Ya María?
Doctora. Doctora, que tenga, wait. Doctora, que tenga, véngase.
Otra.
Okay.
Que salga yo.
Cheese.
¿Qué dice que salga?
Que se asegure que salga yo.
Ay, mira, ¿a dónde vino la señora doña con Rubén? Sí. Con Rubén, al guerrero azteca. No, nada más había una que
La semana que viene. No, tengo que quitar.
We love each other. All right, 1, 2. No peace symbols. 3. And I'm going to get a couple more, okay? Batteries are low. Great. All right. 1, 2, 3. Oh, you guys look great. Thank you. Yeah, driving by in the
I tried. I said it to like my friend couldn't do it. So I said, oh no! Did you get the presentation? How did that go?
You have to ask. Yeah, he didn't say anything to me, so you can take anywhere.